Welcome to another episode of Touring the AFC South. I am your host, Mike Patton, and on this episode, we will be talking a little 49ers. Yes, we will be talking the NFC West and the NFC champion, San Francisco 49ers, just a little bit. Also, we'll be talking a little fantasy football and getting people ready with talking fantasy football when it comes to the AFC South. And I have a guest on this episode that definitely is well versed with the 49ers and, of course, fantasy football. That would be Mr. Eric Crocker. What's going on, man?
Oh man, chilling, man. Ready to talk some football on this beautiful Tuesday morning.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Definitely. We're going to get into that more, the rundown that I just gave you. But of course, we got to do the get it off your chest segment, like I do with every episode. And there's something that I have to get off my chest. That, of course, I had a few discussions on Twitter about this. The top 25 comes out. Of course, it comes out every year, the preseason top 25. You have all these teams that are listed and, all the expectations, things like that. Then they play the first game. Such was the case with Florida State. They were ranked number 10 in the nation, playing all the way in Ireland versus Georgia Tech. They end up losing the game by a field goal, and everyone's like, oh, upset, upset, upset. And I'm like, do we even know if this team's any good? They're ranked top 10. I totally get it. And it's based off of, the people they brought in. They brought in DJ from Oregon State and previously Clemson and a few other guys. But do we actually know if this team together has any chemistry to actually be good? To me, in college football, these rankings, when you do them very early, they're more about pageantry than they are about or previous things than they are about the actual team that's on the field, because the team could be ranked top 10 and end up falling out of top 10 within like 3 weeks because they're terrible. So to me, I didn't really see it more as an upset. I saw it more as a game that, hey, they lost a game. It's an upset in terms of the numbers and things like that, but we don't even know if this team's any good. This team could be 6-5 at the end of the season. So I didn't really see it as an upset. People were disagreeing with me. Oh, it's an upset. It's an upset. I'm like, we don't even know if they're any good. So, that was my get off your chest segment. I'm like, hey, folks, maybe get rid of the preseason top 25. Don't rank teams to maybe like the fifth or sixth week of the season or something. But you're
Kind of like
ranking
how
all
they
these
do
teams that are terrible.
with the BCS standings. Like the BCS standings don't come out until later in the year, right? Like so you have
Right.
time to kind of get this build up, what this team is, what they aren't, whatever, who the top dogs. And then once the BCS standings, like once all that kind of starts to get a little solidified a little bit later, it's like boom, you get the BCS rankings. But yeah, they do come out with these preseason polls super early. And I will say this about Florida State. Since Mike Norvell has taken over, like they've been a good team. They've been a very formidable opponent to pretty much everybody that they play. Last year, they're coming off of a season where they were undefeated up until they didn't make college football playoffs, and then they sat all their starters pretty much against Georgia, or they didn't sit, but guys elected to not play. Uh, I I I haven't been big on DJ Ugunlele. Like I've watched him a lot. Obviously, at Clemson, you got to see him play and what that looked like, and you're like, he kind of to me came off as the biggest kid on the playground who had the strongest arm, and they were just like, all right, hey, you're really big, you got a really strong arm, and you're actually athletic. Let's just make you play quarterback, even though maybe you should play like defensive end or something. And he at sometimes I think even at Clemson, I remember seeing him filling for Trevor Lawrence. I'm like, dang, this dude might be like really be good. And obviously he, coming from Bosco in California, I'm in California right now. Bosco's a powerhouse program. What he did there, you're thinking like, okay, this is potentially going to work out, but uh, you could see right away the guy just there's something about throwing the football that's more of a chore for him, just with being accurate. And then he goes to Oregon State, a team that kind of took that off of his hands. You don't have to be this super accurate guy all the time. We're going to be this pro style offense. We're going to hand the ball off to Martinez. He's going to, or Rodriguez, whatever his name is, black dude with dreads, but like a Mexican last name. But all right, he's going to ball out. He's going to do his thing. And obviously he left to Miami. But you thought like that was a good fit for him, where they took the onus off of him of having to be this like prolific passer. And then he goes to Florida State. And once you fall behind with someone like him, and you understand he's not the purest of passers, you start to see the struggles. And I think Florida State is going to go as he goes. that's unfortunate because I coached and trained the kid Blake Nicholson, who's a linebacker at Florida State. I feel bad for him. I think he's going to go through kind of a rough season. So we'll continue to kind of monitor Florida State, but the preseason ranking based off of what Norville has been, I think was justified. But then when you lose a game like this against Georgia Tech, who I think only Nick Saban saw them being good this year, you might look to be in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, I did see Taylor King transferred there though from Texas A&M, so maybe he's their saving grace at quarterback. We shall see. But we're gonna kind of, of course, that's a get off your chest segment for this episode. We're gonna move on over to a team that's really trying to get over the hump. That would be the San Francisco 49ers. Keep getting to the Super Bowl, keep seeing the Chiefs the last two times, and it just hasn't ended well. But what 49ers fans are hoping ends well is Brandon Ayuk and Trent Williams being on the field this year and happy. Now, for those that don't know, Mr. Eric Crocker, locked on 49ers. So he's definitely tuned in to what is going on out there in the Bay Area. So, what have you heard anything, or are you hearing the same things that we're hearing when it comes to Brandon Ayuk and Trent Williams in terms of new contracts, or basically Brandon Ayuk not holding out but holding in, and Trent Williams basically just not being there, wanting to get a new contract? Have you heard anything different? Heading up to cuts and things like that.
I haven't heard anything different. I would say the only thing that may be a little different than what most people are hearing is I got a little bit of insight of how he is actually in the building, and a little bit non-cooperative, I guess you could say. He kind of does the bare minimum of whatever he has to do to not get fined. Like, in the wise words of my guy Marshawn Lynch, I'm just here so I don't get fined. So obviously, you guys know, if you are in the NFL right now, you're a player, and you elect not to show up to training camp, you would get fined is like upwards of $40,000 a day. A lot of guys don't want to take that fine, especially back in the day. You would get fined, but then once you sign, the team can kind of take away your fines. All right. Well, that's not the case anymore now. So dudes are doing more in hold ins, so they don't get those fines. And he's doing that, but he's not really cooperating everywhere else. Where I was thinking he's in the meeting rooms, he's paying attention, he's locked in on the offense, he's watching practice, maybe he's taking notes. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think he wants to get this thing done and solidified and move on, whether it's to a different team or with the 49ers. So I don't think he's being like the easiest person to deal with in building, but this is a doing of the 49ers, a team that understood really when you drafted receivers back-to-back years. We talk about the 49ers, right? And they do so many different good things with building this roster, but you draft Deebo Samuel. He has a really good rookie year. Then the very next year, you draft Brandon Ayuk in the first round. And right there, I was just wondering, did you expect both of them to be good, or maybe one of them to be good, or how did that work? And I always, I look at it from a roster building standpoint. If once they drafted Ayuk, it was very clear you're going to have to pay one or both of these guys. And it comes off as something that they weren't necessarily prepared to do. And now you have to pay, you paid Deebo Samuel big money when he signed, and now you're having to pay Brandon Ayuk. I think the tough thing for Brandon Ayuk and him getting paid is the offense does not go through him. This is a guy that has been terrific for the 49ers. He's done everything that they asked him. He's caught the ball very well. He gets open. He gets separation. He's won at all levels. He's a versatile receiver. If there's one guy that they lean on to beat man coverage, it's him. But he's kind of the fourth thought of guy in the offense, which is weird because he's like the most targeted guy. But when it comes to the 49ers offense, it goes through CMC. And Christian McCaffrey's going to get his carries. He's going to get his catches. Then they figure out all these different ways that they can get the ball into Deebo Samuel's hands. Even though he didn't have as many targets or catches as Ayuk, he still had more touches when you factor in his running and them handing the ball off to him. Then you have George Kittle, who is the only 1,000-yard pass catcher last year at the tight end position. But not only is he valued in the passing game, he's also a big part of their run game with his blocking ability. And then you get to Brandon Ayuk, who my brother actually pointed this out to me, who's a diehard Dallas Cowboy fan, and sees how they utilize CeeDee Lamb. He's like, now the 49ers, I don't think they value Ayuk the same way that we value CeeDee Lamb. They don't move him around a whole lot. There's not a whole lot of motions. There's not a whole lot of quote unquote force feeding. And of course, they don't have to they have so many talented guys on the offense, but in turn, that makes him, even though he's highly productive, second in the NFL in yards per reception last year, 20 something in targets, but like 16 yards, right? So highly productive. Even though he's been that productive and that efficient, I think they feel like his role in the offense is replaceable. Whether they replace him
Mhm.
with multiple guys or maybe just one guy, but it's hard to replace what Debo Samuel gives you. It's hard to replace what George Kittle gives you. It's hard to replace what CMC gives you. But the one pass catcher where, hey man, I feel like and this is Kyle Shanahan talking, my offense, my schematics, being able to get guys open, I feel like that I can manufacture that. I think that's where it makes it tough paying him 27, $28 million per year.
Mhm.
So I think that's the struggle. I think that's where they're at. I wish they would have dealt with this earlier in the offseason, kind of like they did with DeForest Buckner, trading him to the Colts. They had a number in mind. Buckner had a number in mind. They figured, you know what, we're never going to meet this number that Buckner wants, so we're just going to trade him. They dealt with it right away when the new league year started. They did not do that for Brandon Ayuk, and in turn, it's been a tough situation. So I don't see that situation. I don't shoot. By the time I hang up here, maybe he's signed, but I just think all in all, it's tough. Maybe they try to force him to play on the fifth year option. I think Trent Williams is a different situation. Just a guy that I think it's just a matter of time before he shows up. He's holding out, so he's eating all those fines and is gonna have to pay over $1 million in fines. But I think when the way he looks at it, with the difference in money that he'll make if he signs a new contract extension with the 49ers or they reshape it, he'll get that money back. So Trent Williams, I expect him to get signed. Brandon Ayuk is really up in the air.
Got you, got you. Boy, oh boy, it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. Now, and you mentioned another wide receiver, and his name is Debo Samuel. Now, there have been rumors out there that this may be his last year in the Bay Area. Is there any some validity to that? And if so, where do you see him landing if he is not in the Bay Area next year?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was just kind of speculation. You kind of looking at the room, how much are they going to pay two receivers? This is when I think people expected the Brandon Ayuk deal to get done. So are you going to pay Brandon Ayuk 26, 27, $28 million a year while also paying Debo Samuel a large chunk of money, especially with some of these contracts how they're backloaded a little bit? And I think people figure, well, would you rather have Debo or would you rather have Ayuk? Most people feel like Ayuk is the better pure receiver. So obviously that's the guy that they would keep. I'm not sure Kyle Shanahan sees it that way. I think Kyle Shanahan may look at it as Debo is the more difficult player to replace, so you'd rather keep him and what he brings to the offense. Uh, but because people, I think, felt like Ayuk would be the one they keep, they were looking for potential options for the 49ers to be out on Debo Samuel. Thought it might happen around the trade, not the trade, excuse me, the NFL draft. It didn't happen. It still hasn't happened. And Debo had an excellent camp for the 49ers. Again, I think people are still kind of speculating potentially he's gone. But if Ayuk is the one that eventually ends up getting dealt, I have a hard time thinking that they're going to like continue to move forward with even potentially letting go of Debo Samuel.
Got you. Totally understand that. Yeah, it wouldn't make much sense to get rid of both. Last question I do have. The 49ers, the one thing that I've noticed is they somehow find a way to keep all these talented pieces together, find a way to make them happy, find a way to fit them into the cap. I mean, their salary cap guy has got to be someone that is sitting next to Jesus and figuring out what all needs to be done. I mean, how do they continually figure this thing out? I mean, can we put any into words how they continually figure this thing out?
Man, it's Parag Marate. He's been their salary cap guy. I want to say since like the mid 2000s. Like he's been around for a long time, and I think for all the reasons why he does a great job and makes it to where everything kind of fits and everything works, and they're able to get out of certain contracts at certain points, and he's like a master at that. I think that also makes it more difficult for a signing like Brandon Ayuk, who just won't settle. Or then you have you add more money to Christian McCaffrey's contract. And then you have a guy like Trent Williams who wants more money added. And I think this is where his style kind of gets them in a bind where you do have two players that want larger contracts and there's kind of a hold up with it. I think he's trying to figure out how to kind of work that within the framework of how he believes these contracts should be structured. But they're kind of running into an issue right now, having to pay all those guys. But you're right. Initially, I mean, Fred Warner, when he signed, highest paid linebacker in the league. Nick Bosa, when he signed, highest paid defensive player in the league ever. They find a way to pay Trent Williams when he signed, highest paid player or tackle in the league. Christian McCaffrey, highest paid running back. Debo Samuel paid a lot. Shoot, there was a time where Jimmy Garoppolo signed and he was the highest paid NFL player in league history. So they figure out a way to do it. I think something that helps as well is how well they've done with drafting players mid rounds. They have starters all over this team that were mid-round picks. They got another one with Dominique Pooney, who was drafted late third round, who they just love, and he's been absolutely awesome for them. And he's going to be starting at right guard for the Niners. So they continue to do very well with guys like him, Diamador Lenore. Heck, Fred Warner, he was a third round guy when he was drafted. So you had him on a really cheap contract for several years. They continue to hit on guys like that. I think that helps be able to pay some of these other guys more of a premium at their positions.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it's going to be interesting just to see how he works this one out. But he is the MacGyver of contracts, in my opinion. So, definitely it's going to be fun to watch and see how he does. Getting a little 49ers talk in. That's the team that I grew up watching and wanted to be a part of. And my cousin actually played for the 49ers, actually. Quentin Patton. That's my cousin.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would see him around. I stayed in an apartment complex, and I would see him out here in Stockton, California. So I have no idea. I mind my own business, so I don't know what he was doing in Stockton, but I would randomly see him at the complex I was staying at during that time. So.
Got you. Well, yeah, we'll definitely want to talk a little bit of 49ers since I had someone that actually is right there close to the 49ers. But of course, we got to get into this fantasy football talk. We're going to get into that right after this commercial break.
EBO Beard Butter and EBO Beard Wash are two of the best beard grooming products for men worldwide. They help promote growth, keep your beard moisturized and soft, and enhance your overall upkeep of your facial hair. And with the new promo code MPAFC10, you can get 10% off on these products. Just go to www.etsy.com/shop/EBO Beard Butter. Again, that's www.etsy.com/shop/EBO Beard Butter. And again, the promo code MPAFC10. Again, MPAFC10, where you can get 10% off any products except for beard boxes. So treat your beard better today by going to get these the EBO Beard Butter and EBO Beard Wash.
All right, and we are back on touring the AFC South. And like I mentioned before, we're going to do a little bit of fantasy football talk. Now, I know there are some people that think they know about fantasy football. I think Mr. Eric Crocker knows a little bit more. So let me actually, let me get through the basics. We're going to start with the basics, of course, in terms of fantasy football, to kind of give people a little bit of basic talk about it. The vision of fantasy football has changed over the years. Of course, it used to be, the running backs, things like that. You get the touches. Now it's a pass heavy league. What is that changed the strategy of drafting over the last few years? Has it changed it for you, or just in general changed it?
Yeah, and the interesting thing with that, man, and one, like, I obviously, like everybody else, I'm in tune with fantasy football. I love it, especially daily fantasy stuff. I do that all the time. I feel like there's been a change in guard with fantasy football where there's like this super analytical crowd. I don't think I'm a part of that group. I'm still a part of more of like the traditional fantasy group of people. But as far as kind of the change in the offenses that are being ran and how they're being utilized, I think you see that right away with who the top guys are that are being drafted in fantasy football. And I think a lot of times it's kind of starting with some of the receivers. Like I see CeeDee Lamb being taken number 1 overall over a guy like Christian McCaffrey, who we know Christian McCaffrey is going to get his touches. He's going to get his carries. He led the NFL in rushing yards last year. He's going to get his pass catches with, was he averaging like 6 yards per game? Excuse me, 6 receptions per game or whatever it is. But he's getting a lot of touches, a lot of catches, a lot of yards, a lot of production, a lot of touchdowns. And people are still like, nope. Give me CeeDee Lamb number 1 overall. Give me Justin Jefferson number 1 overall. And those guys are going really high. So I think that right there tells you how people feel about where the NFL is going. And we'll see. We know this. You and I, we've been around for a long time. All fashions come back around, right? The baggy clothes. It's a little bit more back in style right now. Went away for a while. And eventually it come back around. I'm curious to see if like power run football starts to come back around. I saw this graphic, and it showed like the running backs it was like 2005 or something like that, and there was like 15 guys that ran for over 1,200 yards. And last year you had 1, and that only 1 guy was Christian McCaffrey. So I'm curious to see if there starts to become a trend where, hey, let's swing this trend back around where running backs matter a little bit more. But as of right now, I think you'd be a little wild to be investing a lot in the running back position first, as opposed to really valuing the receivers at the top of your drafts.
All right. And another question I did have is, like you mentioned, pass catchers, things like that. How do different leagues like a PPR league change up and determine who you draft early in terms of like maybe a wide receiver, one that, gets a lot of yards per ones that gets a lot of catches or receptions and targets?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so we could use like Deebo Samuel, right? Use him as an example since I'm very well versed with that player with the 49ers. Deebo Samuel to me is a very valuable player. This is a guy that, again, even though he may not get the most catches, he's still going to get his touches, going to get yards. He's still going to get double-digit touchdowns. So he's a guy, if we're talking about PPR, and again, he's not going to go like super high or anything like that. But if we're talking PPR, he's even lower on my board as opposed to more of a traditional standard scoring. So I think that right there, if we're PPR, I'm going to lean more. And we can pair these 2 guys together. Brandon Ayuk and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's going to be targeted more heavily than Brandon Ayuk, although Brandon Ayuk still might end up with a good amount of yards or close to production from that standpoint, but there might be a difference in 30 receptions between the 2. So if I'm in the PPR league, I am definitely going to value St. Brown a lot more than Brandon Ayuk, whereas in the traditional league, maybe it's a little closer. Even if I still value St. Brown more, I'm not going to take him rounds ahead of a guy like Brandon Ayuk.
Got you. Okay. And, you spoke on running backs and you spoke on CMC. Of course, another running back that, traditionally got picked high was Mr. Derrick Henry. He's playing with the Baltimore Ravens now. So with that being said, when would be the time that you would draft a running back? If you were, running a fantasy football league and say, hey, I need to draft a running back here, I'm going to get great production for this place that I'm drafting him.
I think my philosophy, especially this year, as I get into all these drafts coming up this week, I'm going to lean more towards loading up my receiver room and then getting my running back. So I might hold off on backs until probably around like the 3rd round, try to get as heavily as targeted receivers as I can in our first 2 rounds, and then go running back. Derrick Henry, a guy who we know he's over there. He's with Baltimore. He's going to split carries with his quarterback. That Lamar Jackson's going to get his carries, going to get his touches, on the ground, and they're going to lean on that run game and some of that power. But also we've seen some other guys be productive at different times with Baltimore, guys like Gus Edwards. I think they're going to lean on King Henry a little bit more than they ever have with a guy like Gus Edwards. I think he's going to help kind of open up some run lanes for him. In Tennessee, he had to be everything, and he was very productive, like up until like he had hurt his foot. And then last year it was like, all right, it was very up and down season for him. But I think he's going to kind of get back into a groove to where maybe we don't see that like, super productive runner, but I could see him having more of a, 1,300 yard season because people have to account for Lamar Jackson in the run game as well.
Okay. All right. All right. And then as far as wide receivers, and you mentioned some of these leagues potentially taking wide receivers first. I mean, if you're running a league, say it's just a regular league, not a PPR league, um, are you how high are you valuing a wide receiver? Are you valuing the wide receiver more than a quarterback, or are you just going, quarterback wide receiver in that range?
Wait, in what kind of league? My bad, missed that part.
Not a PPR league, but just a
Okay.
regular, league. Would you draft? Do you go quarterback, wide receiver, or would you go wide receiver, quarterback? A lot of people would draft the wide receiver first and then go back and get a quarterback, which I think is interesting in its own right. But that's just me. But what would you do?
Well, I think with the quarterback position, I usually take them a little bit later because I feel
Hmm.
like my production that I get out of Kirk Cousins will be similar to what I get out of Dak Prescott, who may be taken higher, right? So maybe there might be a 3, 4 touchdown difference. Am I going to feel that 4 touchdown difference on a week to week basis? Probably not, right? Like maybe Dak Prescott throws 3 touchdowns. Well, if he throws 3 in this game, but I get 2 out of um, out of Kirk Cousins and maybe more yards, would I be more well versed to be able to uh, more allocate my resources for as far as roster building to another position like a receiver where maybe now I have more depth. So I tend to draft quarterbacks a little bit later. Heck, I mean, how late could you have gotten Brock Purdy last year? He ended up throwing like 32 touchdowns. And he's probably, I don't know, if I had to guess, top 5 in the league in touchdown passes last year for a guy who you could probably get at the very end of a draft. So I too tend to go more receiver early on as opposed to quarterback.
Got you. Yeah, it definitely is going to be an interesting draft. And I got to credit my guy Damian Adams, the real deal Damian Adams. You can catch him on Let's Be Real Media. He came up with a reel the other day that made me think about something. We don't value offensive linemen when it comes to fantasy football. So he had an idea of, I don't know if it's been mentioned before, but I saw it through his reel. He had an idea of actually being able in fantasy football to draft offensive lines.
Mm.
I honestly thought that was a pretty good idea. I don't know necessarily how you score it, but what
Probably,
do you
do you
think of
give
that
up
idea?
sacks? Do you give up sacks? Do you not give up sacks? How many times does your quarterback get hit? So every time a quarterback gets hit, maybe you get dinged. Maybe if you go a whole quarter without giving up a sack or giving up a hit, maybe they get more points that way. I could see something like that, being able to you come up with a scoring system, and I think heck yeah, I'm down with that. I mean, we've seen games where a quarterback gets sacked 5 times. Well, your offensive line should take a big hit. The tough thing is the old line is probably thinking like, well, if the quarterback hung on to the ball, try to make a play, get sacked, behind the line of scrimmage or gets hit, like that's on him. But ultimately with scoring, I think they can do that without it being, you know, too difficult with it. So that's the first I've heard of it, but that's how I would do it. How many times is quarterback getting hit? How many times is he getting sacked? And I would score the offense based off of that. It's
Yeah,
very rare.
definitely.
I'd say it's rare you go a whole game where both quarterbacks in this game, like nobody got hit, nobody got sacked. Like that's very, very rare.
Got you. Yeah. Like, again, Damian Adams, Let's Be Real Media over there with P Shark and all those fellas, Three the Hard Way, and all those fellas is over there. Jeans over there. Oh Lord, Jeans would be upset with that because he's a New York Giants fan, and New York Giants offensive line has always been notoriously bad. So
Yeah.
and another two teams that have had bad offensive lines last year would be the Jacksonville Jaguars, and that would be the Tennessee Titans. And speaking of that, we're gonna get into fantasy football talk when it comes to the AFC South, but we're gonna take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back, and we'll get into it.
A shift. A shift is something that happens and changes the dynamics. And that's what happened when Garrett Logistics was born. After 10 years as a sales pro in the logistics world of sporting goods, John Garrett decided to pivot to the world of freight and start a brokerage. So you're saying to yourself, Why trust Garrett Logistics? Well, Garrett Logistics helps shippers improve overall workflow, along with increased on-time pickup and delivery percentages. Last-minute loads, multi-drop pickups, and more are part of the services with Garrett Logistics. They're available Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., and Saturday, 8 a.m. to 12 p.m., all times Central Standard Time. So give them a ring at 615-400-8484. That's 615-400-8484, or you can email them at john@garrettlogistics.co or visit their website at garrettlogistics.co. Garrett Logistics, where the motto is, it's not just freight to us, it's your business.
All right, and we are back on touring the AFC South. Mr. Eric Crocker has graced us with his presence and his knowledge today on this episode. But of course, it wouldn't be an AFC South show if we didn't talk a little bit about the teams in the AFC South. That would be the Tennessee Titans, Indianapolis Colts, Jacksonville Jaguars, and Houston Texans. We're going to start with the Tennessee Titans. I know there is plenty of questions in fantasy football about this team. You know, I'm being kind of slack because people really don't think about them when it comes to fantasy football outside of Derrick Henry. But and he's not here anymore. But there is some pieces here that do have some intrigue. One of those pieces would be Calvin Ridley. He came over from the Jacksonville Jaguars, joined the Tennessee Titans. He's playing with a little bit more or less experienced quarterback in Mr. Will Levis this year. So it's going to be interesting. And, you know, of course, he's playing for a offensive coordinator for a coach that was the offensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills. Good gracious, the Cincinnati Bengals. So it's going to be interesting how, you know, Brian Callahan uses him. However, he is familiar with the offensive coordinator, the offensive coordinator came over from Jacksonville to Tennessee. So, what do you think his market is in fantasy football this year? Do you think he actually is maybe a mid-round guy, or do you think you get him a little later for just what he may be able to produce?
And we're talking about Calvin Ridley?
Yeah, Calvin Ridley.
You know, I think the tough thing for Ridley, and they have a plethora of weapons there, and I know we'll get to that, but you got Tony Pollard, you got DeAndre Hopkins, you have Tyler Boyd, you got Ridley. Heck, you even got Burks and Okonkwo, right? You look at all these weapons, and on paper, you're like, oh, man, like this offense should be something. But you don't know about the quarterback. And I think for all these guys, it's going to kind of come back to the same thing. If I had any idea of who they would lean on more or who I would value more in the offense for the Tennessee Titans, it would probably be Tony Pollard, just at the running back position. And I watched him do a lot of different things with the Dallas Cowboys in the NFC for some years, right? Whether being able to catch the ball at the backfield, run him. He actually, was decent with being able to, punch it to the end zone. They did miss Ezekiel Elliott last year. Dallas Cowboys having to lean on Tony Pollard to be that main guy a little bit more. I don't think he's quite that, but as a guy who could be featured a little bit more in the passing game and run the ball, I think he might be a guy that I value a little bit more in the offense for the Texans as far as fantasy goes. But Ridley, watching him with Jacksonville, he was very kind of hit and miss. You were waiting for him to kind of, catch on and get in a rhythm. And from week to week, it was very, very up and down. He might have 2 catches. He might have 5 catches, and you had no idea which version of Ridley you were going to get from week to week there. I would say it would probably be similar here. And if I had to lean on anybody in this offense, it would probably be DeAndre Hopkins. He's a guy who has a crazy catch radius. He makes the quarterback right, even when the quarterback is wrong. He's a guy who had some productive games with Will Levis, but I don't look at Will Levis and think, oh, man, this is going to be this high-volume passing guy. So, Ridley, a guy who on most other teams, I would really maybe like and value him more mid-rounds. In this offense, I'm probably a little bit lower on him because I think a bulk of the fantasy production is going to go to Tony Pollard and DeAndre Hopkins.
All right. And you spoke of Tony Pollard, and I did have a question about him. One thing that I did notice, and then I actually went out there to training camps. I actually got to see him a couple of times too. One thing I've noticed is that, they're listing Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears as 1A and 1B. So there isn't like a one solid running back to be like, okay, cool, this is going to be the guy. It's going to be like a game-to-game situation. Now, with him being a fantasy football guy in terms of like somebody to draft in a running back position, how much do you think that hurts his value that he could potentially be a game-to-game situation depending upon who's the hot hand?
I think that's the good thing, man. I'll see. I'll be curious to see if they do like a hot hand thing. But Tajay Spears, that's a kid out of Tulane, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
I watched him run crazy on my USC Trojans. This is a guy that was highly productive at Tulane. And, last year you saw them trying to like, okay, let's get him the ball a little bit more, give him the ball a little bit more. It was a little tough. You did have Derrick Henry there, but, with them having him kind of 1B or 1A, kind of splitting carries with Tony Pollard, that's something that I could see productive for him and him continue him to potentially kind of ease his way into maybe being more of the feature guy. Because again, we've seen Tony Pollard in that role. Not as ideal for him. I think Tony Pollard is better in more of a, I come in here and there, give me a drive here and there, every other drive I'm in. As long as he's splitting carries, I think you see the best version of him. But Tajay Spears is a guy who they may start to feature a little bit more at the running back position. So I think that does make it very tough for Tony Pollard if that's what they're doing, because I know me personally, I would lean more Tajay Spears. I wouldn't draft either one of these guys high, but if I were to draft one, I would probably lean more Tajay Spears because I think there's more intrigue with what he potentially could be in that offense this year.
Yes, and the guy with no ACLs. Just remember that. But he's jumping over people. I don't know if you saw that picture. He's
No
where he's
ACLs,
jumping
huh?
over somebody. He's got like, I think he's got one knee that doesn't have ACL in it. Yeah.
There was an NBA player like that back in the day that played for the Spurs. Can't remember his name, but he didn't have ACLs. That was kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's nuts. I'm trying to figure out how that works. But you did mention him, and I have to talk about him. That'd be Mr. Will Levis. Of course, everything hinges a little bit more on him this year. He's in the second year. Also, he wasn't a first round pick, so he doesn't have that 5th-year option. So more decisions have to be made upon him a little bit earlier than what you would usually have. He has had some times where in practice where he's looked great, had some times where he looks like he's working through some things, but again, it's practice. You're supposed to throw interceptions in practice. That happens. What do you think his value could be? Do you think he's more of a guy that you look for when you're replacing a quarterback on a roster, as opposed to a guy that's you actually look to actually draft him, perhaps?
Absolutely not. Not drafting Will Levis. He's more of a guy. If my, one of my quarterbacks get hurt on my roster, I'll start to look at the waiver wire. I might even look at the quarterback that was behind the quarterback that I have before I look at Will Levis. But eventually, I will kind of get around to him. I think with him is going to be kind of a wait and see thing this year. Is he going to be a high volume passer? I would say that if I had to guess, he might be on the lower end, unless the defense is just really bad and all of a sudden they're behind in games. He has to throw the ball more. He may get some inflated stats there. But again, I think they want to lean on the running backs. They want to get DeAndre Hopkins the ball. There was a huge game with DeAndre Hopkins catching a bunch of touchdowns from Will Levis. I don't think that's something that's going to be consistent for either one of them. So I'd be a little reluctant to take him at all. He'd be either a waiver wire claim or wait till somebody gets hurt and then eventually claim him.
Gotcha. And I will say the defense is going to be interesting too. I had to mention that. They bring in Chidobe Awuzie, they bring in L'Jarius Sneed, they got Jamal Adams, they got Quandre Diggs. So they basically bring in the Seattle safety connection along with L'Jarius Sneed and Chidobe Awuzie, who was with the Bengals as well last season. With that being said, of course, Jeffrey Simmons up front, you can't forget about him. But with that being said, those defenses are not necessarily a high priority for people to draft early. Does this defense intrigue you enough to be like, okay, maybe I'll take a chance in this being my defense to start the season, or just more of a wait and see just because of all the different pieces?
I think it's wait and see, but not because of the different pieces. We didn't even mention Roger McCreary. He's a guy I like in that nickel spot. But I wouldn't say it's really wait and see just because of the pieces. I think it's wait and see because we don't know how that offense is going to be. So let's say the offense and Will Levis isn't great. Well, the defense is going to be on the field a lot more. And that's not ideal for any defense to have to continue to try to carry an offense that may be a little bit more stagnant with moving the rock. So for that reason, I would kind of be a little bit lower on the defense. But as far as the guys that they have, I love them. I love the pieces. I love the guys. I love everybody's so hard on Jamal Adams, and I don't think he's this great coverage guy, but I like him as a football player. Quandre Diggs, I think he got signed at the right time. This is a guy that is a playmaking safety. He's really versatile. He's able to be good in coverage as far as taking the ball away. I really like that. About him. You mentioned some of the guys, L'Jarius Sneed. I think he's going to make it tough for AFC South receivers. There's a lot there to really like. You talked about Chidobe Awuzie. Chidobe Awuzie.
Chidobe Awuzie.
Yeah, I like him at corner. And, I watched him get drafted by the Dallas Cowboys from Colorado. I watched him develop there. I watched what he was with Cincinnati. And I think he's going to be a solid addition to this defense. So I feel like the Tennessee Titans have kind of hung their hat a lot of years on being a little bit better on the defensive side. And I think these additions really help.
Definitely. It's going to be interesting.
Can they help enough to overcome? Can they help enough to mask maybe an offense that isn't as good? I love the weapons. It's just a huge question mark with Will Levis. And so if Will Levis is good, then Tennessee might have something good over there because I think they could be good defensively. And again, I love the weapons that they have offensively.
I honestly think they can finish second in the division this year. I do.
To Houston?
Yeah, to Houston. Yeah, I definitely think they can. And, a lot of people have looked at me kind of crazy. I'm like, look, Will Levis doesn't have to be a superstar. He just has to value the football, do the little things. That's literally it. He doesn't have to be a superstar. He just has to make the needed plays. That's it.
Yeah.
Pretty much to me. And I mean, I've seen little glimpses of it, and and just with the hard work and the things that he does behind the scenes, I'm like, okay, it gives me kind of like, okay, a sense of like, yeah, this guy's going to figure out a way to get it done. And he hates to lose. He hates to lose. And I want a quarterback that hates to lose. So
You're right.
I would say that aspect of seeing that after games when they lost, I would say, yeah, I would bet on him actually putting it together. I like to call him, I created a nickname for him, by the way. I don't know if you've heard this nickname, but the nickname I got for him is the Mayo Messiah, since he did like the little Mayo thing.
Yeah, that stuff was gross. As somebody who I do not eat mayonnaise at all, I won't touch mayonnaise. My daughter likes mayonnaise on her sandwich. Like, I won't even make her a sandwich with mayonnaise. I tell her she has to do it herself. Like, and then to see a guy drink mayo in his coffee, I'm like, this guy's a maniac.
Gotcha. We're going to run through every other team real quickly. Houston Texans. What do you think about in terms of CJ Stroud and his actual chances there in terms of fantasy football? He's probably going to be a high draft pick, pretty much.
I've seen their head coach come from the 49ers, D'Amico Ryans, and I think they want to hang their hat on playing good defense, being able to run the ball. Unfortunately, last year with Dameon Pierce, for whatever reason why he just fell off a cliff, being able to run the ball, their run game was very stagnant, was not good, and they had to lean on their young quarterback Stroud a little bit more to really kind of carry this roster, carry this team potentially to the playoffs. So I think his numbers were really high. He threw the ball a ton. I don't think they quite want to play that style of game all the time. I get it. They have terrific weapons. They just traded for Diggs. They have Nico Collins. They have Tank Dell. They have Dalton Schultz. They have guys everywhere, but they also added Joe Mixon. And if I'm going fantasy, I'm looking at Joe Mixon because I think they want him to be a huge part of the offense, whether they're running the ball or throwing the ball to him in space. But because I think they want to lean on, hey, man, we got a terrific defense, a young defense. We got these guys, we got these playmakers. It was a very young defense last year, a little bit more experience now. Love how they added Jimmy Ward last year. It gives them a veteran presence, even moving forward. Let's lean on that defense. Let's run the ball a little bit more with Joe Mixon and throw the ball as needed. But I could see some of Stroud's numbers go down a little bit as they hope to not need him to carry. And then in spots where, all right, all of a sudden we need this quarterback to carry us, he's shown the ability to be able to do that as a rookie. So I don't think they are scared of that, but I definitely think they would like to really lean a little bit more on Joe Mixon as opposed to exposing your quarterback, who ended up getting banged up a little bit, missed a couple games. They want to keep him upright this year, and I think a big part of that is going to be able to run the ball a little bit more. So love Stroud. I do think he'll go high in fantasy. I might be just a tad bit lower because I think this defense is going to be improved. I think the run game is going to be improved.
All right. Well, you hit on one of the questions I did have in terms of the weapons and things like that. And yeah, definitely that. And then defensive wise, I would say that it's going to be interesting to see how things work in terms of rushing the passer, but they might get gashed in the running game because Nico Autry actually is going to be suspended for the first 6 games.
Yeah.
So as far as Colts running game, dominant, especially with Jonathan Taylor. I mean, I expect him to be one of the first running backs taken. I mean, do you agree? You might be the first running backs taken?
Hell yeah. He's a guy, and last year was really weird. He was
Mhm.
holding out, trying to get paid. Eventually, he got out there, but I think this year he's going to have a really big year. And I think, Richardson, we talk about quarterbacks throwing a lot. I don't think they want him throwing the ball 30 times a game. I think with Richardson right now, as he continues to develop more as a passer, a lot of talent throwing the ball. All right, a lot of talent throwing the ball. But I think because of, hey, we don't want to make you this high volume guy right now. Let's lean on
Mhm.
Jonathan Taylor and get back in that groove. I think even last year is a little weird even when he returned, but he started to slowly get back to it as the season went on. I think they start off really heavy with Jonathan Taylor, and he's a guy that kind of carries his offense. So we talked about taking receivers high in fantasy. I might take Jonathan Taylor just as high as I would take any receiver.
No, that definitely diminishes Michael Pittman Jr.'s role. He is the number one wide receiver, which people question
Yeah,
a lot. People question a lot if he is a number one wide receiver a lot too. So
yeah.
all right. And as far as the Jaguars, you got rookie Brian Thomas Jr. out there showing flashes of being a deep threat, and you have Trevor Lawrence, who has been a roller coaster ride. Quiet as it's kept, people don't talk about that. He's been a little bit of a roller coaster himself. So,
I'll tell
do
you who
you?
does talk about it, 49er fans, because they're like, well, if Brock Purdy was taken number one like Trevor Lawrence, people would be so much higher on Brock Purdy. And so I've heard all about that. Obviously, Brock Purdy has been good, but yeah, it has been a little bit more of a roller coaster for Trevor Lawrence. I think a big part of that is, having the head coach that he had the first year, everything being turmoil, him having to carry everything, and then now as he continues to work with Doug Peterson, it's getting a little bit better, and we're assuming that this year he might get into even more of a groove. So definitely something that I think a lot of us are really keeping an eye on. How is Trevor Lawrence going to look this year? I think some of these added weapons like Brian Thomas might help him.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. Travis Etienne actually is going to be another key, potentially fantasy football sleeper as well. You see, we've gone through every team. I do have one last segment, 5 questions, 2 answers, and 1 choice. We're going to run through this pretty quickly. Get your answers. Let's see. You're lining up at corner. Randy Moss is on one side. Terrell Owens is on the other. Which wide receiver are you taking in a one-on-one matchup?
Oh man, this is it's a lose-lose question in the sense of how I answer it.
Pretty much.
Um, I'm gonna go. I would rather. This is crazy. I would rather guard Randy Moss. Be
Okay.
and I wasn't the fastest guy at cornerback. I was with the New York Jets for a little bit. I probably didn't make it because I'm just not fast enough, right? Like, well, not fast enough, not smart enough, and maybe me answering this question shows how smart or lack thereof I am. But Randy Moss, at least I feel like I can overplay for the go ball. Now, I'm likely going to get mossed by him, but I feel like I might be in position. I mean, he can outrun anybody. But if
Mhm.
I like, all right, look, I know he's likely just going to run and go. Let me just turn and run and close my eyes and try to just swipe at this ball. Maybe I knock it away. The
Okay.
reason why I
All right.
said him over
Mhm.
Terrell Owens is because with T.O., I don't know what route he's going to run. He might run a go route, and he was really good at that. He might run a big post. He might run a slant. Heck, he might run a hitch. And when he runs a hitch and turns around, he's one of the more like fearful ball carriers at the receiver position with the ball in his hands. I think people kind of downplay how good run after catch he was. So, I mean, if you go and watch his highlights, Randy Moss, you watch, he's just running by guys, throwing his hand up, catching the ball over everybody, which is scary. Terrell Owens, you watch his highlights, he's catching a 5-yard pass, turn around, throw this guy off of him, throw that guy off of him, and then outrun everybody. So I think there's just more ways that Terrell Owens won, and that scares me a little bit more when I'm lining up, as opposed to knowing the one way that Moss is going to beat me is going to be speed and jumping over me. I can I can at least take a risk with that, which I mean, again, lose-lose situation.
Got you. Okay. The Wood or Juice? Which movie are you watching first?
Ooh, the wood. And I love Juice. I think Tupac was a menace in Juice. I think
Mhm,
Omar Epps played his role very well. But the wood, there's just some good vibes to it, and
mhm.
I'm picking the wood.
All right. The next one we got. Let's see. More painful loss for the 49ers, February 2024 or February 2020 versus the Chiefs in both of them.
Man, they both hurt. I mean, you had like 10-point leads in both of them. I would say this
Right.
last one because this game went to overtime and you kind of knew what was coming. Once you kick
Hmm.
that field goal and you're only up 3 in overtime, it's like Mahomes finna win this game with a walk-off touchdown, and you could kind of just
Hmm.
feel it coming. The other one, it was like you're up, and then all of a sudden you're down, and it was really weird how it happened, but at least you were able to kind of prepare for it. This one, you weren't able to really prepare for it. So it was
Hmm.
you're up, they drive down the field, they kick a field goal to go into OT. You drive down, you get a field goal, then you have to watch this guy convert on 4th and 1, and then drive down and throw a touchdown to win the game. So that one hurt a little bit more.
All
And I
right.
think
We're
it hurt
doing
more because of the first one. Like the first one hurt, and then it's like, well,
Mhm.
no, not again. And then it happens again. It's like a
Right.
girl. I've never taken a girl back who cheated on me, but if a girl cheats on you and then you take her back and then she cheats on you again, I think that second time might hurt a little bit more. I don't know. I'm not experiencing that. Your audience could probably answer that better than me because I ain't taking no chick back who cheated on me. But that hurt though, just it happening again.
Right. Okay. Tell me when to go or sprinkle me. Which E40 song you taking?
Oh, tell me when the go is really big for the culture.
Hmm.
Being on the West Coast, I'm from Stockton. It's technically the Valley, but I'm an hour from Oakland. I'm an hour, from San Francisco and all that. So,
Hmm.
it was really big. There's a big influence on it. But Sprinkle Me, I grew up on that E40. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like I grew
same.
up on
Same.
on that. I lived in San Jose at the time. I lived in the Bay Area. E40,
Hmm.
obviously, huge, and he calls himself the ambassador of the Bay. So I have to go more Sprinkle Me because that just
Hmm.
reminds me of my childhood. But
Same.
yeah, tell me when to go was huge for the culture.
Yes.
Huge.
All right, last one. Joe Burrow or Josh Allen. Which fantasy QB you taking first?
Oh, Josh Allen, only because I know I'm gonna get the rushing touchdowns as well.
Okay.
I'm gonna get
All
the rushing
right.
touchdowns. I'm gonna get the rushing yards. He may
Mm-hmm.
throw for 34 touchdowns and then run for another 8. You know what I'm saying? Joe
Mm-hmm.
Burrow might have better passing numbers
Mm-hmm.
potentially, and you don't even know that. I think that's still even kind of a toss up. So I'll
Gotcha.
go Josh Allen. I think that one's a pretty easy answer to uh, easy answer.
All right, cool. Well, thank you for your time, Mr. Eric Crocker. Thank you for coming on this episode of Touring the AFC South, giving the people a little bit more fantasy insight into the AFC South, as well as San Francisco 49er and basic fantasy football knowledge. If you want, tell everyone where they can find you on social media as well, and then from there.
Oh yeah, man. You guys can find me on Twitter at Crocky209. And then you guys can find me daily on Locked On 49ers, myself, my co-host Brian Peacock. Again, come at you 5 days a week. We're on YouTube, we're on Apple, we're on Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. The
All right.
the number one 49ers podcast in the world. And a lot of times, especially during the year, the number one team specific podcast in the world. So it's fun. I enjoy doing it. I enjoy talking about the 49ers. And yeah, man, that's where you guys can find us.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, Mr. Eric Crocker. Of course, you can find me, Mike Patton, on the artist formerly known as Twitter at Mike Patton82. It's MikePaton 82 on Twitter. Also, you can find Touring the AFC South on all listed platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, you name it, we are there. I want to thank you all for your time for tuning in to this episode of Touring the AFC South. We're out. Peace.